Anyway, joining us now to discuss all the ins and outs of all of this, we welcome back to the program. Bill Binney is with us. And also he's a former technical director of the NSA Geopolitical and Military Analysis and Reporting Group. Dan Bongino, risk management consultant, former Secret Service agent, NYPD, and contributing editor of Conservative Review. Bill Binney, you are the architect, if I'm not mistaken, of the NSA surveillance program, and you became a whistleblower when you resigned in 2001 after spending, 30 years with the agency?
Yeah, a little over 32, as a civilian,
Yeah. And what can you tell us about whether or not these FISA requests were true, whether the first was denied, and whether or not in the middle of a campaign that somebody in the Obama administration, in fact, got permission for surveillance of Donald Trump's Trump Tower and members of his campaign?
Well, you see, I think that they're missing the point here. Under Executive Order 12333, they do surveillance of everybody in the United States without warrants. And that's done through various upstream programs, Fairview, Storm Brew, Blarney, and also cooperation with other countries in terms of collection worldwide. So it's all done without warrants, and that was testified to by Adrian Kinney and David Murphy-Falk, who were transcribing at Fort Gordon, Georgia. They were transcribing conversations between U.S. citizens with no warrant at all.
So, for example, General Flynn, there was no warrant in his case.
That's right.
And General Flynn, when they recognize if they're doing monitoring of an ambassador from another country, let's say Russia, and General Flynn is on the phone, once they recognize he's an American citizen and they don't have permission to surveil him, aren't they supposed to minimize what they listen to and what they record?
Yes, they are. Yeah, unless they find probable cause, at which time they require to get a warrant. That's right.
Okay, and they didn't do that, and then they also leaked all the information. Is that not true?
Yeah, that's right. And I look at it this way. The IC is becoming more like the Praetorian Guard, where they're trying to determine who the emperor is and also influence what the emperor does. So, I just think that this is getting out of hand. And I think, President Trump is absolutely right. The intelligence community needs to be revamped.
Are you saying that every American can be wiretapped against their will without any warrant at any point?
No, I'm saying they are.
You're saying you mean I have been wiretapped?
That's right.
Repeatedly?
Yes.
And by wiretapping, that means what? Recording my phone conversations, taking my emails, my texts?
Right, that's correct. And also storing it for mining. It's all done under Executive Order 12333, Section 23C.
Well, 12333 is the one that Obama put in place just 2 weeks before he left.
Well, he opened it up to all the other agencies in the intelligence community. Originally, it was just restricted. The only ones who had access were NSA, CIA, and FBI.
You're saying that every American listening to this program and every American in this country is being surveilled by our government without any type of warrant. Isn't that against unreasonable search and seizure, sir?
Yeah, it's a violation. This is why I left NSA in 2001. They're violating the First, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments to the Constitution, as well as any number of laws. That's why I left. I couldn't stick around and be a party to that.
And you were one of the big architects of the surveillance program.
Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, yeah.
Well, what do you mean, unfortunately? Don't we need surveillance?
Yes, but you don't need it to be abused, and that's what they're doing now.
So, was Donald Trump being surveilled even without the FISA court?
That's correct. And actually, what it is he's being targeted now. They're going into the database looking for data on him.
So, in other words, all the mining that they've done, now they're just searching it all out. So, in other words, my private conversations with Donald Trump could be made public one day.
That's right.
And who would release that?
It'd have to be somebody in the intelligence community. Well, now any one of the 16 agencies now have access, I guess.
And by the way, isn't that a felony to release that information?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And how come nobody's been charged up to this point, and do you think people will be?
Actually, well, I mean, we when Nixon was doing this with the same three agencies basically at the core, NSA, CIA, and FBI, I mean, he got impeached for that. Dan
Bongino, what's your take on all this? This is rather shocking, wouldn't you say?
Oh, holy Moses. I mean, how do you follow that up, Sean? Rarely am I a guest on a show where I'm listening like, no, let him go. I mean, that is, if that is in fact true, and I have no reason to question it at all, the legitimacy of that, that is just a stunning revelation. and it separates out the warrant issue from the wiretap. In other words, if that is in fact true, then Trump's statement is correct. His tweet about being wiretapped is absolutely true. Whether there's a FISA warrant or not, as reported by the New York Times and other places like that, that then becomes kind of a moot point, because then it becomes a point of who released the information, not in fact was he tapped. And then you have we have a conspiracy right now that's devastating to the former Obama administration. But once we find out who releases that information, I'm sure Mr. Binney could tell you at least
what level. Well, if they're data mining all of this, Mr. Binney, then is that in and of itself, you're saying, and I'm agreeing with you, that would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and you're probably right, the First, Fifth, and Sixth. So all of this is happening. Why don't the American people know that every conversation they have is likely being data mined?
Yeah, unfortunately, they don't seem to care. They think, they throw out the statement, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't have anything to hide. Well, I have three things to say about that. The first thing is that's a great quote from Joseph Goebbels, former Hitler propaganda minister. Secondly, what the people think in this country is totally irrelevant. It doesn't matter what they think. The only thing that matters is whether or not the administration thinks you're doing the wrong thing. And thirdly, I take a quote from Goethe that said, and this I think is our current state, no one is more hopelessly enslaved than those who believe they are free.
But if there's let me ask you this, if there's no warrant, let's say that they are data mining, let's say everything you're saying here is true and I have no reason to doubt you. Let's say every American is being monitored and they're recording every phone conversation. I want to ask this about Donald Trump. Would that mean now that they can go back without a warrant and pull this out and leak it against Donald Trump, every private conversation he may or may not have had?
Yes, and probably they can go back at least 5 to 10 years.
Every conversation, does that include every email, every tweet?
Absolutely.
Every text, rather?
That's right.
Good grief, so nobody's safe and secure.
If you want to see the way they're collecting it, look at, just Google NSA space Fairview and NSA space Storm Brew, and you can see all the tapping points inside the United States.
I got to be honest, there's very few times in my life that I get stunned, and you've just stunned me. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back, and Jason Chaffetz is waiting outside. He'll join us live at the bottom of this half hour. A lot more to talk about, including the health care bill, the executive order now, the new executive order the president signed, banning travel from 6 territorial countries, and more obviously on this, surveillance issue of the Trump campaign and who knew what, when, and where. All right, as we continue Sean Hannity's show, we continue with Bill Binney and also Dan Bongino. I want to ask you, Mr. Binney, as one of the architects of the NSA surveillance program, were you the chief architect?
I was the designer of how to manage large volumes of data, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you referred in an interview, I guess with Aaron Klein, to, referencing 2 NSA whistleblowers who said that they worked at the agency in Fort Gordon, Georgia, and they were asked not only to monitor phone calls of U.S. citizens, but transcribe them. This is all being done without a warrant?
That's right.
And what about James Clapper's claim in March of 2013 during an open Senate session of the Senate Intelligence Committee that the NSA was not wittingly collecting data on Americans? Did he lie?
Yes.
Do you think he lied yesterday in an interview that he gave about not knowing about this?
Well, he would know about the FISA warrant, but he wouldn't.
He said he didn't.
FBI and CIA have direct access into the NSA data with no oversight or attempted oversight at all. So they could have people going in targeting President Trump or President-elect Trump or candidate Trump at any time. Even before that, they could go back years, and he would never know that. So he's not necessarily lying. He just doesn't know. Isn't
Dan Bongino what Mr. Binney is describing here? Isn't that the foundation of a police state? And if you have a corrupt government, that they can use this information to silence opposition, blackmail people, compromise people. No offense, but I don't think I'd want every email I've ever sent looked at by my government. I just wouldn't. And I'm not sending any...
Is there any other way to look at this, Sean? Think about what happens in North Korea.
I say a lot of curse words on some private calls sometimes,
me too.
I sound like Linda.
They aren't so private anymore.
Well, Linda. I'm almost as bad as her. Almost, not quite.
But think about it. A real police state like North Korea or Cuba, there's no private and public self, right? When you're behind closed doors, nothing's really private. They're listening to your phone. They're looking at your internet traffic. There are literally neighbors paid to spy on people in places like North Korea and things like that. So there's no distinction between the public and private self. why are we replicating that model here in the United States, where the private self, your email behavior, your private telephone conversations, are now no longer private, but they're in the public domain for what? Government bureaucrats and officials to access anytime they have a gripe against you? I mean, Sean, you and I both have a lot of enemies out there. You know, I mean, this isn't the kind of thing you want out there. That's the actual distinction.
Is that why the IRS is going after me now? Is that why? Even though I pay a fortune in taxes?
I mean, the sad thing is you don't know. Like, is it that you have to ask the question is bad enough? The answer, frankly, is irrelevant. That you're asking the question says we're all in trouble. And if what Mr. Binney says is even half accurate, again, I have no reason to think otherwise.
Should we worry about
spooky stuff? Should
we worry that the judge in the FISA court, Mr. Binney, was picked by Bill Clinton, appointed by Bill Clinton?
Well, I mean, that certainly would be some concern, but I think the FISA court's basically totally irrelevant. They're not even concerned, or are they involved in any way with the Executive Order 12333 collection. That's all done outside of the courts and outside of the Congress.
So all that, when I talk about the president opening up the sharing of 12333, Executive Order 12333, you're saying that they now allow the sharing, but it always allowed the monitoring of every American citizen, and they do it with regularity, and everything is being recorded.
Yeah, that's right.
Jeez, good grief! What the hell is going on in this country?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I looked at it this way. When some of this first started coming out with from Edward Snowden back in 2013, there was a quote by Wolfgang Schmidt, who was a former lieutenant colonel in the East German Stasi. And if you remember, the East Germans had folders on everybody in their country, and they kept records of them all. This colonel said, for when he looked at the NSA collection system and its acquisition of data, he said, for us, meaning the Stasi, this would have been a dream come true.
Very frightening, very chilling, and we really appreciate it.